Unless you follow French politics, the last 48 hours in French politics may have made very little sense to you.
President Emmanuel Macron has rolled the dice on his political future.
France has been plunged into snap elections.
This is clearly a gamble, and many on the left and even in his own ranks and in the government think it's too risky.
So let's try to get this straight. French President Emmanuel Macron wants to call a snap election against an opponent who has never been stronger. Like, the timing couldn't be worse. He just lost a different election, and if he loses again, he'd be giving up huge amounts of power. But he gets to stay president regardless. Let's make it all make sense. So what got Macron so riled up that he felt the need to go all in and call a snap election? Well, it was the result of another election at the European Union level.
A weakened French president, Emmanuel Macron's party, was trounced by candidates for Marine Le Pen's Nationalist Party.
Every 5 years, there's a big vote in Europe. Hundreds of millions of people across all 27 member states of the European Union, they elect members of European Parliament. So they draft laws, steer policy, and handle budgets at that European level. But to figure out who wins, every country that's part of the EU runs their own vote. So let's take France, for example. If you were a French citizen voting in the EU elections, you would have had distinctly French choices. Rassemblement National, or the National Rally, that's the party of Marine Le Pen. Anti-immigration, skeptical of the EU. Or maybe you were on Team Besoin d'Europe. That's a coalition of parties, one of which is the party of French President Emmanuel Macron. So here's how the vote actually broke down. A stunning rebuke of Macron's centrist coalition, a big victory for the political right. Now, remember, this doesn't change anything in France, and it doesn't even necessarily represent a seismic shift at the EU level, because Macron's coalition, just to use an example, ultimately gets combined with centrist parties across Europe, from Germany, Hungary, Slovakia, Italy. You get the idea. All 27 member states are having the same election. Together, those centrist parties form a kind of super centrist party that did end up losing seats this weekend, but still held on to third-place position. Marine Le Pen's big victory, that contributed to all of the other far-right victories in Europe. They all contributed to the overarching Identity and Democracy Party, which represents the far right in European Parliament. Now you'll notice, neither party is top dog. That honor went to the European People's Party, which politically is a combination of all of the center-right parties across Europe, falling somewhere in between the politics of Macron and Le Pen. But again, none of that matters for Macron's political future. What he saw was the devastating loss registered in France, locally.
His coalition came in second, well behind Marine Le Pen's far-right National Rally, which is on course for nearly a third of the vote.
I think that what he's trying to do now by calling these early elections is he's trying to bank on the fear of voters.
Cette décision est grave, lourde, mais c'est avant tout un acte de confiance.
What Macron is doing now by calling a snap election is kind of like telling his opponent, okay, you won the away game, but now let's play at home and see who wins. What makes this so confounding, though, is that Marine Le Pen and the far right have never had as much momentum as they have now. If we look at the most recent polling we have, the weekend elections across Europe, 4 political parties lost ground. All of them represent centrist or left-leaning politics. The 3 parties that gained ground, all representing the political right.
Je pense que c'est le peuple qui s'exprime d'un ras-le-bol général.
So why would Macron push all of his chips in, putting his own career at stake? Like, he didn't have to call an early election, right? He could have just ridden out the storm, stayed in power another 3 years, and then used that time to slowly turn the tide. Well, let's consider a few things. 1, Macron wants clarity. He says as much. So scathing was the outcome of the French EU vote. Macron believes citizens of France must now make a clear choice.
Leurs représentants atteignent près de 40% des suffrages exprimés. Je ne saurais donc, à l'issue de cette journée, faire comme si de rien n'était.
2, he's already in a bad position. He has no majority. Getting any bill through the National Assembly is already a struggle, so what power would he be holding on to? Maybe now's the best time to grab the reins and do something drastic.
He's trying to regain the initiative by calling this snap election. His hope is to taking advantage of the parliamentary election system to create a situation where he can build a coalition against the far right.
And 3, there is a chance he could win. Maybe he can capitalize on a swell of national pride with the Olympics coming up in Paris, or maybe he can mobilize voters who abstained this weekend, thinking maybe they'll come out and vote when it really counts. But
this is suicide. This is suicide.
They are voting to say no to Macron. And there might very well be a majority of hard right at the National Assembly.
So how does this play out if Macron does indeed lose the election? Well, it's not like here in Canada where, if there's a snap election, the whole government could change, including whoever's in the top job. In France, the snap election call is just a legislative election call. It's not a presidential election. So if Marine Le Pen's party were to win a majority, Emmanuel Macron would stay president. But he'd have to appoint a prime minister, typically from the party that wins the most seats, and that would mean sharing power, where the president keeps control of foreign policy and defense, while the prime minister takes charge of domestic affairs and budgets.
An arrangement like this would make France, I would say, almost ungovernable. Macron is a staunch believer in the EU. The far right wants to completely dismantle the bloc from the inside, and they have completely different views on immigration, Ukraine, the environment.
But there's one more reason to roll the dice. Maybe losing isn't so bad. Analysts say surprising his political opponents by kind of throwing them into the deep end of governance might just give them a chance to look bad.
Maybe Macron actually wants the far right to come to power and govern France because he's secretly hoping that they would become so unpopular during this time that he would have his party swoop in and be the savior against the far right in the upcoming 2027 presidential elections.
It would be as if Macron was saying, okay, you think you can do a better job, prove it. And Macron knows there are tough times ahead. For example, France is in a rather large budget deficit situation right now, which means that any future government would have to make some tough choices. Do you raise taxes or do you cut spending? And maybe, just maybe, when Macron's term is up in 3 years and French voters are faced with a fresh choice in the presidential election, they'll say, maybe Le Pen wasn't the right call after all. That's Macron's biggest gamble of all. Give Le Pen 3 years worth of rope to hang herself with and hope it all goes according to plan.
And after Macron's announcement, there were already protests across Paris and other cities against the far right. And then on the other hand, you have far right sympathizers that are saying that now is their time to shine.
So of course, this could all turn out to be a colossally terrible move for Macron. Either arrogant for thinking that he could win against such long odds, or defeatist for ceding so much power when he could have held on for years more. But this could also turn out to be quite a clever strategy, a calculation that losing the battle ultimately will help him win the war.